Natalie Parker, a dedicated nurse, was arrested by police on her way home from the hospital without reason. Her phone captured the entire encounter live. The community rallied, charges were dropped, and justice was served. Watch this shocking yet inspiring story of fear, courage, and standing up for what's right.
Before we begin, hit subscribe to Black Battles, where every story hits harder than truth itself.
Natalie Parker leaned back in the driver's seat, letting out a slow sigh as the soft hum of her car engine filled the otherwise quiet highway. The fluorescent lights of Grayson Memorial Hospital had faded behind her, but the exhaustion from 12 hours on her feet still weighed heavily on her. She had spent the entire day attending to patients, moving from one emergency room bed to another, monitoring vital signs, comforting those in pain, and making life-and-death decisions in moments that felt both endless and urgent. Her uniform, now slightly wrinkled and dotted with tiny stains from the day's chaos, reminded her of the relentless dedication her job demanded and the invisible, emotional toll it carried. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she glanced down to see her 11-year-old daughter, Sophie, calling. Natalie's face softened as she swiped to answer. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice tired but warm. "Mummy." Sophie's voice was high-pitched with excitement and impatience. "When are you coming home?" "I've been waiting forever." "Mom said dinner will be ready soon, but I need you to tell me all about your day." Natalie smiled despite the heaviness in her body. "I'm almost there, sweetheart. I promise I'll be home soon." "You save some of that pasta for me, okay? Yay." Sophie cheered, her words bubbling with childish joy. "Hurry, Mummy. I have a surprise for you." Hearing her daughter's voice was like a lifeline after a draining day. Natalie's shoulders relaxed a little, and she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. Being a mother was the part of her life she cherished most, and she often thought about Sophie as the reason she pushed through the long, exhausting shifts. But there was no denying that the weight of responsibility clung to her like a second skin. Driving along Interstate 85, Natalie made a habitual turn into a familiar rest stop. She had stopped here countless times before, sometimes for a cup of coffee, sometimes to stretch her legs, or just to take a brief moment to herself before completing the drive home. It was a place that felt safe, ordinary, and predictable, a brief pause in the chaos of her life. Today, all she wanted was a cup of coffee and a few minutes to breathe. She parked in a quiet corner, far from the larger crowd of travelers. The smell of fresh coffee beans drifted from the small cafe inside, and she stepped out, rubbing the tension from her shoulders. The night was calm, the highway mostly empty, and the soft hum of distant traffic provided a strange sense of comfort. Natalie felt a fleeting relief as she carried her coffee to a small bench outside, cradling the warm cup in her hands. For a moment, she allowed herself to just exist in the quiet. No emergencies, no demands, no lives depending on her decisions, just her and the gentle night. As she sipped her coffee, she scrolled through her phone, glancing at notifications and responding to a few quick messages from colleagues. Her mind, however, couldn't fully escape the tension of the day. Every time she thought of her patients, the decisions she had made, the lives she had tried to save, she felt that familiar mix of pride and anxiety that came with being a nurse. It was a job she loved, but one that left her constantly on edge, carrying invisible scars that no one could see. Just as Natalie was about to stand and return to her car, a sudden motion caught her attention. She looked up and noticed a police cruiser slowly pulling into the lot. The lights weren't flashing, but the officer inside, tall, stern-looking, and moving with deliberate precision, seemed to lock eyes with her for a moment longer than necessary. Something in his posture made her stomach tighten. She had driven past this rest stop hundreds of times and had never felt threatened here before. Yet a strange, uneasy feeling began to creep in. She instinctively held her coffee a little tighter and straightened her posture, preparing herself to respond politely if needed. Natalie had always been a law-abiding citizen. She followed the rules, respected authority, and trusted that doing the right thing would keep her safe. But tonight, that simple belief felt fragile. Like it could shatter in an instant, the officer stepped out of his car and began walking toward her. the quiet click of his boots echoing slightly in the empty lot. Natalie took a slow breath and forced herself to stay calm. "Good evening," she called, her voice steady, betraying none of the sudden anxiety curling in her chest. "Evening," the officer replied, stopping a few feet away, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned her, and for reasons Natalie couldn't yet understand, there was a weight to his gaze that made her feel unusually exposed. Like every detail of her appearance, every movement, was being measured and judged. Natalie set her coffee on the bench and watched him carefully. Her heart had begun to beat a little faster, a subtle warning that something was about to unfold, a routine stop that suddenly felt anything but routine. In that quiet rest stop, under the dim glow of the streetlights, Natalie Parker's ordinary night was on the cusp of being transformed into something unpredictable, tense and terrifying, unseen by her. Her phone rested on the bench, screen facing up. She had no idea that within minutes, the events about to occur would be captured and streamed live, turning her quiet, ordinary stop into the beginning of a story that would grip hundreds and eventually thousands of viewers. Natalie took a final sip of coffee, bracing herself. Unaware that the rest of her night and her life was about to change forever, Natalie Parker had just finished her coffee, savoring the last warm sip, when the officer, Ryan Cole, reached her car. He moved with a deliberate calmness, his hand resting casually near his belt, but there was a tension in his posture that immediately set Natalie's nerves on edge. She straightened her back and forced herself to meet his gaze, hoping that politeness and composure might keep the encounter simple and brief. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice low but firm. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Natalie shook her head, keeping her tone measured. "No, officer. Is there a problem?" He leaned slightly closer, his eyes narrowing as if examining her every movement. "You smell like marijuana," he said bluntly. "Have you been using?" Natalie blinked, surprised, and tried to respond calmly. "No, sir. I don't smoke, and I haven't touched marijuana. I just got off work." She pointed vaguely toward the hospital district. "I've been at Grayson Memorial all day." Ryan didn't nod, didn't look convinced. Instead, his jaw tightened, and he straightened to his full height. "I'm going to need your license and registration. Step away from the vehicle, please." A sudden spike of fear ran through Natalie's chest. Her hands trembled slightly as she retrieved her wallet and opened the glove compartment. She had always believed that following the law would keep her safe. Yet, in this quiet rest stop with the night stretching around them, she suddenly realized that her obedience might not protect her at all. "I'm happy to cooperate," she said, her voice steady despite the tightening in her chest. "But can you please tell me why you believe I've done anything illegal?" Ryan's eyes darted around the empty lot for a brief moment before returning to her. "We have reason to investigate. You're going to stay calm, follow instructions, and let us handle this." Natalie swallowed hard. She wanted to remain calm, to show no fear, but the officer's words carried an unspoken threat. One wrong move, one hesitant gesture, and she feared it could spiral out of control. She took a step back, hands still visible, trying to signal cooperation. As if sensing her anxiety, Ryan gestured sharply toward her car. "I'm going to search your vehicle. Don't touch anything. Step away from the car now." Natalie's heart pounded. She had nothing illegal in the car, just her work bag, some water bottles, and her life's essentials. Still, the intensity in the officer's eyes made her feel as though every personal item might be twisted against her, as though the small belongings she carried daily could suddenly become evidence of wrongdoing, unbeknownst to her. The small phone she had left on the bench began recording automatically when she set it down earlier. The live stream flickered quietly in the background, capturing everything. Natalie's voice, calm yet edged with tension, was being broadcast to the world, though she had no idea at that moment that hundreds of eyes were about to witness her confrontation. "Please, officer," she said quietly, though her words were barely audible over the distance between them. "I really haven't done anything wrong. You can check anything you want, I don't understand why this is happening." Ryan's expression hardened. "Step aside and don't interfere," he said sharply. "Backup is on the way if you resist." Natalie nodded, her stomach sinking. She felt trapped, her usual sense of safety, her belief in fairness, all slipping away under the weight of his authority. She could feel her chest tightening, her pulse racing, as she realized that compliance might not even be enough. The officer's assumptions, his aggression, had already shifted the dynamic. What had started as a normal, uneventful night stop was becoming something more frightening, more unpredictable. The sound of another cruiser's engine hummed faintly in the distance. Natalie looked up, her eyes widening slightly. Backup was arriving. She knew that once additional officers joined, the situation could escalate even further. She tried to steady her breathing, repeating in her mind that she had done nothing wrong, that her innocence would protect her. But the logical part of her brain fought against the growing dread that sometimes, in moments like these, innocence offered no shield at all. "Officer, please," she said again, raising her hands slightly. "I promise you, you'll find nothing. I haven't broken any laws." Ryan's gaze flicked momentarily to her hands, then back to her face, and Natalie felt the weight of judgment pressing down. Her voice trembled slightly now, though she tried to hide it. "I just want to go home to my daughter," she added. A quiet plea that went unacknowledged, the live stream still silently recording, captured every tense second: the officer's rigid posture, Natalie's careful compliance, the small details of the quiet lot illuminated by the overhead lights. It was ordinary turned extraordinary, mundane turned frightening, and Natalie had no idea that her personal nightmare was about to become a story witnessed in real time by strangers. Some sympathetic, some SEPTICAL, as Ryan reached for the car door. The night seemed to grow heavier around her. Natalie's mind raced, trying to imagine what could possibly happen next. Aware that the line between routine police procedure and something far more dangerous was vanishing before her very eyes, her quiet, ordinary life had just collided with fear, authority, and uncertainty, and in the span of a few minutes, Natalie Parker would discover that one wrong encounter or even one assumption could change everything. Natalie Parker stood beside her car, her hands still raised slightly, her chest tight with anxiety. The quiet rest stop that had felt so safe only moments ago now seemed to close in around her, the shadows of the overhead lights casting long, uneasy shapes across the pavement. Every passing second stretched longer than the last, and Natalie could feel her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to stay calm, trying to remind herself that she had done nothing wrong. Officer Ryan Cole circled her vehicle like a predator, his eyes sharp and calculating. Natalie noticed how methodical his movements were, the deliberate way he scanned the interior, as though expecting to find any reason to justify what he already seemed to have decided. She swallowed hard and took a small step back, her fingers curling slightly into fists at her sides, not in defiance, but in the instinctive desire to protect herself. "You see this?" Ryan asked suddenly, pointing toward a small compartment near the center console. His voice carried the sharp edge of accusation, and Natalie felt a jolt of panic shoot through her. "We found something suspicious." Natalie's stomach dropped. "Suspicious? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "There's nothing in there." Ryan ignored her protest. "Step back. Don't touch anything." The words felt like a hammer striking her chest. For the first time, Natalie's mind raced through every scenario, every possible outcome. Would they seize her car? Arrest her? Worse, what if her daughter Sophie found out that her mother might be in real trouble, far from home and powerless to help herself? The thought twisted in her stomach, a cold spiral of fear and helplessness. Backup officers arrived quietly but firmly, their presence adding both authority and an unmistakable pressure. Natalie felt the invisible walls closing in. Each officer's stance, each calculated step, reinforced the idea that this was no ordinary stop. Ryan's demeanor left no room for negotiation, no room for explanation. "I need you to stay calm, Natalie," Ryan said, his voice sharper now, commanding attention from everyone around. "If you resist, it will only get worse." Natalie's mind flashed to the live stream she hadn't even realized was still recording. Her phone, perched innocently on the bench she had left behind, was capturing everything: the fear on her face, the tremor in her hands, the tension in every word she spoke. Hundreds of strangers could be watching her right now, witnessing this sudden unraveling of a life she had always thought was orderly and safe. She felt a pang of vulnerability so intense it made her dizzy. I'm not resisting," she said, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "You'll find nothing, please, I just want to go home." Ryan's eyes didn't soften. He reached into the compartment she had barely touched, pulling out a small plastic bag. Natalie froze. She knew immediately what he was implying, though the bag held nothing of substance. Certainly nothing illegal. "This is what we found," Ryan said, a triumphant edge in his tone. "Looks like you've been hiding something." Natalie felt the air leave her lungs. "That's not mine. I don't even know how that got there." Her voice shook now, the tremor betraying the panic rising within her. She could feel the weight of the accusation pressing down, suffocating in its intensity. Everything she had built, her career, her life with Sophie, the respect of her colleagues, seemed to hang by a single thread in this moment. One of the backup officers stepped closer, clearly uncomfortable but silent. Natalie's gaze flicked between them, searching for an ally, someone who might see the truth and intervene. But the fear in her chest grew. She realized that she was completely at their mercy. The live stream quietly recorded the unfolding drama, broadcasting it to the world in real time. Comments were already beginning to appear, viewers questioning the fairness of what they were seeing, some expressing outrage, others disbelief. Natalie had no idea she was becoming the center of a public storm. Ryan's voice cut through the air again. "You're coming with us, Natalie. Obstruction, interference, and whatever else we find. Step aside." The words were like ice in her veins. She felt the cold dread of what could happen next. The crushing possibility that she might be dragged into a legal nightmare she hadn't even imagined. Her mind raced with thoughts of her daughter, her car, her home, everything she feared losing in an instant. Yet, even in the midst of fear, Natalie's inner strength flickered. She straightened her back slightly, trying to control the quiver in her voice. "Please," she said again, more firmly this time. "I haven't done anything wrong. You can check, you can see for yourself." Ryan's expression didn't change. The small, ordinary rest stop now felt like a stage set for judgment. And Natalie Parker, a woman who had dedicated her life to saving others, was caught in a nightmare of suspicion, accusation, and escalating fear. As the night stretched on, Natalie realized something chilling. Her ordinary life, her predictable night, had been ripped from her control. Every decision she had made, every law-abiding choice she had taken for granted, suddenly seemed powerless against the arbitrary force of authority. And in that moment, the rest stop was no longer just a place to rest, it had become a trap. And she was at its center. By the time Natalie Parker was escorted to the back of the police cruiser, her phone had been quietly streaming the entire encounter live on social media. She hadn't realized it when she left it on the bench during the confrontation, but now the world was watching. The live stream flickered to life, viewers tuning in by the hundreds to witness the unfolding events of a rest stop that had, moments ago, seemed ordinary and safe. Natalie felt a strange mix of fear and disbelief. She was trapped in the back of a police cruiser, her hands still tingling from the anxiety and adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had never imagined that a routine stop for coffee, a normal break in her day, could escalate into a public spectacle before a camera she hadn't even intended to turn on. And yet, as the comments and notifications began to pour in, she realized that her private nightmare had now become a very public one. "Stop streaming that!" Ryan Cole barked, but it was too late. The feed was already out, circulating at speeds she could not comprehend. Within minutes, hundreds, then thousands of viewers were watching. The comments were a chaotic mix: outrage, disbelief, and shock at what they were seeing. Some viewers called for immediate accountability. Others questioned the behavior of the officer, noting how Natalie had cooperated fully while being accused and threatened across town. Clara Morgan, an investigative journalist known for her work exposing corruption and systemic abuse, was scrolling through her feed when a notification caught her attention. A video titled "Nurse Arrested at Rest Stop Claims She Didn't Do Anything" had already amassed hundreds of live viewers. Clara clicked in, her brow furrowing as she watched the scene unfold. A woman, visibly frightened yet composed, standing beside her car as the officer aggressively searched and accused her. Asterisk, "This isn't just a routine stop," Clara muttered under her breath. Something about the demeanor, the way he bypassed her explanations, the sudden escalation, it all screamed systemic abuse to her trained eye. Clara quickly began taking notes and screenshots, bookmarking the stream. She knew that incidents like this were rarely isolated. Patterns of misconduct often hid behind the mundane. Back at the rest stop, Natalie sat in the cruiser, her mind racing. Every notification she received on her phone now felt like another person witnessing her fear, her helplessness. She could feel the weight of judgment, even though she was innocent. Her pulse quickened as she imagined her daughter, Sophie, at home, waiting and worrying, unaware of the chaos unfolding miles away. Natalie had always prided herself on being in control, but in this moment, she realized how fragile her sense of safety truly was. Asterisk comments continued to flood the live stream. Some viewers expressed anger at the aggressive tactics of the officer. Others speculated about potential racial bias, questioning why a woman who had done nothing wrong was being treated as though she were guilty. A few commenters suggested that this was part of a larger pattern of civil asset seizure practices, where officers targeted ordinary citizens for personal or departmental gain. Each comment made Natalie's stomach churn. She felt exposed, judged, and yet strangely validated by the awareness that the world could now see what was happening to her. Clara Morgan, meanwhile, began tracing connections. She remembered similar cases she had investigated months earlier, routine stops at rest areas. Ordinary citizens suddenly accused of minor infractions that escalated into arrests, often resulting in fines, asset forfeiture, or public humiliation. The hallmarks were the same: an ordinary citizen, a minor pretext for a stop, and officers who seemed to exploit the system for authority and control. "This might be bigger than just one nurse," Clara whispered, already drafting the framework for her next investigation. She noted the officer's name, the location, and the time. If patterns existed, she would find them, and she would make sure the public knew. Back at the scene, Natalie's fear had transformed into a heavy weight of disbelief. She had never been in trouble with the law. She had always obeyed the rules, respected authority, and lived her life quietly and diligently. Yet here she was, handcuffed for obstruction, accused without evidence, and caught in a nightmare that played out not just in front of the officers, but before thousands online. The live stream had become a lifeline in its own strange way. Even as panic surged, Natalie realized that people were seeing her truth in real time. The world was witnessing her innocence and her courage in facing a terrifyingly unjust situation. While she had no control over the officer's actions, she did have this, a record, a witness, and proof that could not easily be dismissed. As the cruiser pulled away, Natalie's thoughts drifted to Sophie. She imagined her daughter watching television or looking at her phone, wondering where her mother was. That image tightened her chest, a reminder of everything she was fighting to protect: her life, her freedom, her family. And across town, Clara Morgan knew this story would not remain confined to a single rest stop. There were questions to be answered, injustices to expose, and perhaps a woman's life to defend in a system that often favored power over truth. What had started as a routine evening had now grown into something much larger. And Natalie Parker's life and reputation was about to become the center of a storm she could not yet imagine. Natalie Parker sat in the back of the police cruiser, her hands cuffed and her mind spinning. The rest stop, which had moments ago felt like a safe pause in her long day, now seemed like a place of uncertainty and danger. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself that she had done nothing wrong, but the words felt hollow against the weight of reality pressing down on her. The small plastic bag that Ryan Cole had. Found in her car was the catalyst for this nightmare. Natalie knew it was innocent, perhaps left behind by a careless passerby or some unrelated incident, but in the officer's eyes, it became a symbol of guilt. Her car, her freedom, and even her career as a nurse were suddenly at stake. Panic clawed at her chest as the thought of Sophie waiting at home filled her with both fear and guilt. Meanwhile, across town, Clara Morgan had begun her own work. The live stream and the footage captured a pattern she recognized immediately. This wasn't the first time ordinary citizens had been stopped and accused at rest areas across Piedmont County. Clara had researched civil asset forfeiture cases before instances, where law enforcement officers could seize property under questionable circumstances, often without a conviction, usually disproportionately affecting marginalized communities. This could be bigger than one arrest, Clara muttered to herself, pulling up her notes and cross-referencing news archives and public records. She found reports of similar encounters at the same rest stops, vehicles searched under flimsy pretenses. Accusations quickly escalated and, in some cases, property confiscated. Each case told the same story. Ordinary people caught in the machinery of a system incentivized to exploit them. Back at the police station, Natalie was placed in a holding cell. The fluorescent lights above her flickered intermittently, echoing the instability she felt inside. She thought about her life, the long hours at the hospital, the nights spent studying new procedures, the love she poured into Sophie. None of that mattered here. The system that she had trusted, that she believed would protect the innocent, now felt like an unpredictable force capable of destroying everything she held dear. Natalie's phone, still recording earlier events, had become a crucial piece of evidence. She hadn't intended to create proof, but the video now stood as a silent witness to the entire encounter, the officer's aggression, her compliance, and the sudden escalation that seemed entirely unnecessary. It was this evidence that Clara Morgan would later use to bring attention to the case, highlighting the broader issues of abuse, accountability, and systemic flaws in the law enforcement structure. David Reynolds, a well-respected civil rights attorney, was contacted as soon as the live footage began circulating. When he saw Natalie's calm yet terrified manner on camera, he immediately recognized the legal and civil rights implications. "This isn't just an isolated incident," he told his team. "This is emblematic of a larger problem. We need to build a federal complaint, and we need to act fast. Her rights have been violated blatantly, visibly, and without cause." As Clara began contacting other individuals who had experienced similar incidents, a pattern emerged. Stories poured in. People had been stopped at the same rest stops, accused of minor infractions, and threatened with seizure of their vehicles or other assets. Each story reinforced the idea that this was not a coincidence, but a systemic practice that relied on fear, intimidation, and the power imbalance between law enforcement and ordinary citizens. At the same time, Natalie tried to remain composed in the holding cell. She thought of Sophie and the idea of returning home safely. She imagined the courtroom, the legal battles that would come, and the long nights of testimony, paperwork, and uncertainty. Fear mixed with determination. Despite the overwhelming odds, she resolved not to let this unjust encounter define her. Outside the holding cell, the world began to take notice. Social media users shared her story, demanding accountability, questioning the aggressive tactics and calling for justice. Journalists picked up the live stream, and soon, the incident became a flashpoint for discussions about police practices, civil asset forfeiture, and the rights of citizens under the law. Natalie, who had never sought attention, found herself at the center of a public conversation that could spark systemic change. Back in her mind, Natalie repeated one thought over and over: she had done nothing wrong. That truth, as simple and unyielding as it was, became the anchor in a storm of fear, accusations, and uncertainty. And while the officers, the courthouse, and the system might not recognize her innocence, she would not allow the narrative to erase it. This moment marked the beginning of a larger battle, one that extended far beyond a single rest stop or a single night. Natalie Parker, a dedicated nurse and loving mother, was about to become a symbol of justice, a rallying point for others who had been silenced, overlooked, or wrongfully accused. The confrontation that had begun as an ordinary stop for coffee had now escalated into a fight for truth, fairness, and accountability. News of Natalie Parker's arrest spread like wildfire. Social media users shared the live stream, screenshots, and first-hand accounts. And within hours, the story had reached thousands across the country. The hashtags demanding justice for Natalie began trending, and her ordinary story of a tired nurse stopped for coffee transformed into a national conversation about police accountability, racial bias, and the rights of citizens. At Grayson Memorial Hospital, Natalie's colleagues were in shock. Nurses and staff who had worked alongside her for years couldn't believe what had happened. Many knew her as dedicated, compassionate, and diligent, a woman whose days were spent saving lives, not breaking laws. As the story circulated, staff began organizing. Messages of support poured in, calls, emails, and even small donations to assist with legal expenses. It was clear Natalie was not alone. Meanwhile, community activists, civil rights organizations, and concerned citizens rallied. They held small gatherings outside the police station, waving signs demanding accountability and immediate action. Justice for Natalie, the signs read. Stop the abuse of power. People spoke into cameras for news crews, describing similar experiences of harassment and intimidation at the hands of local law enforcement. Each testimony added to the growing wave of outrage. Clara Morgan, the investigative journalist who had first noticed Natalie's live stream, worked tirelessly to document the larger pattern of abuse. She reached out to other victims, cross-referenced records, and built a detailed timeline connecting the Piedmont County rest stops to repeated incidents of questionable searches and arrests. Clara's reporting went viral, amplifying the call for reform and placing pressure on local officials to respond, as the public outcry intensified. Petitions were launched demanding justice for Natalie and reform in civil asset forfeiture laws. Within days, thousands of signatures were collected online. People from different backgrounds, parents, nurses, everyday commuters, shared their stories and expressed solidarity. The collective voice of the community created a sense of urgency and moral pressure that no official could ignore. Back in the holding cell, Natalie had no access to the growing wave of support. She sat quietly, exhausted, but a spark of hope began to kindle. Knowing that strangers were watching her story, standing up on her behalf, and questioning the injustices she was experiencing gave her strength. Her fear of losing her car, her freedom, and even her reputation was tempered by the knowledge that the public was bearing witness. David Reynolds, her civil rights attorney, coordinated with Clara to ensure that the evidence from the live stream was preserved. He began drafting a federal complaint, arguing that Natalie's constitutional rights had been violated during the unlawful search and detention. This was no longer just a personal struggle. It was part of a broader effort to challenge systemic abuse, and Natalie understood the gravity and potential impact of the fight ahead. Outside, rallies continued to grow. Nurses from other hospitals joined in solidarity. Activists marched with banners and citizens stood together demanding transparency. The communitized mobilization became a powerful symbol of resistance and hope, inspiring others to speak out about similar injustices. The story of Natalie Parker resonated deeply because it reflected a universal truth. Ordinary people could become victims of extraordinary abuse, and yet their voices could still matter, even as Natalie awaited the next steps of the legal process. The knowledge that she was supported gave her a sense of calm she hadn't felt since the encounter began. She realized that the fight for justice was bigger than one night, one officer, or one small town. It was about protecting ordinary citizens, ensuring fairness, and holding those in power accountable. Clara Morgan's reporting, combined with the viral nature of the live stream, made it impossible for the case to be ignored. Local officials were forced to respond, promising investigations and reviews of policy. Community leaders held meetings, discussions began about reforming civil asset forfeiture laws, and ordinary citizens, once voiceless, found a platform to demand change. By the end of the week, Natalie's story had transformed from a terrifying personal encounter into a rallying point for accountability and reform. The fear that had gripped her on that night in the rest stop began to shift, replaced by the determination to see justice served not just for herself, but for the countless others who might face similar abuses in silence. Through the outpouring of support, Natalie began to see the strength of collective action. She understood that while one officer's misjudgment had upended her life, the courage of a community could push back against injustice and ignite real change. For the first time in days, hope mingled with fear, forming a resolve that would carry her through the challenges still to come. Weeks passed since Natalie Parker's arrest at the rest stop, but the story continued to capture the attention of the nation. The live stream, once a small accidental recording, had become a permanent record of the night that could have destroyed her life. Instead, it became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of truth. David Reynolds, her civil rights attorney, worked tirelessly with Natalie to prepare the federal complaint. Every detail of the encounter, every word spoken, and every action of Officer Ryan Cole and his backup were meticulously documented. The evidence was overwhelming, especially the video that had captured the entire confrontation. It was clear that Natalie had been completely cooperative, and that the escalation had been entirely unwarranted. Meanwhile, Clara Morgan's investigation into systemic abuses at Piedmont County rest stops had gained momentum. Her articles exposed patterns of civil asset forfeiture being misused, highlighting repeated incidents where ordinary citizens were targeted for minor infractions, often resulting in unnecessary arrests or property seizure. The public response was intense. Citizens demanded accountability, pressuring local authorities to take the matter seriously. Eventually, the Piedmont County Commission held a public hearing, inviting citizens, law enforcement representatives, and advocates to speak. Natalie, though nervous, attended with David Reynolds by her side. She recounted the events of that night, explaining not only her personal fear, but also the broader implications of unchecked authority. Her words were heartfelt, honest, and compelling. The room fell silent as she described how she had been threatened, humiliated, and detained for no reason other than an officer's assumption. The hearing led to immediate action. Officers involved in the arrest were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, and recommendations for reforms were issued. Among these reforms was the proposal of a new law, informally referred to as Natalie's Law, which would ensure judicial review before any civil asset forfeiture could take place. This law aimed to protect ordinary citizens from wrongful seizures, and to create accountability for law enforcement officers. For Natalie, the legal and policy victories were deeply validating, but the personal triumph was even more meaningful. Her charges were officially dropped, her name cleared, and she was reinstated at Grayson Memorial Hospital with full back pay. Colleagues and friends welcomed her with warmth, acknowledging not just her dedication as a nurse, but her courage in standing up against injustice. Yet the impact extended far beyond her own life. Community activists, inspired by Natalie's ordeal, began Torgonist training sessions, awareness campaigns, and legal workshops for citizens to understand their rights. Nurses, parents, students, and ordinary commuters joined the effort, creating a network committed to accountability and systemic reform. Natalie had unwittingly become the face of a movement that reminded everyone of the importance of vigilance, courage, and community support. As she returned home one evening, Sophie ran into her arms, her excitement and relief palpable. "Mommy, I knew you'd come back," Sophie exclaimed, her small hands clutching Natalie's. Natalie hugged her daughter tightly, feeling a surge of emotion she had almost forgotten amid the chaos. This was what she had been fighting for: her life, her dignity, and her family. Natalie's story also resonated with those who had never been directly affected by police misconduct. News outlets, social media discussions, and opinion pieces brought broader attention to systemic issues in law enforcement. People began questioning long-standing practices, demanding transparency, and advocating for the protection of civil rights. In this way, a single act of courage had rippled outward, creating awareness and inspiring action across communities. Reflecting on the ordeal, Natalie realized that the events of that night had changed her forever. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and injustice head-on and survived. But more importantly, she had discovered the strength of community, the power of documentation and truth, and the impact that one person's story could have on society. She knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, that systemic reform would require continued effort, and that vigilance was never ending. But in the quiet moments when Sophie slept peacefully and the world felt calm, Natalie allowed herself to feel a profound sense of accomplishment. She had endured the impossible, and in doing so, she had sparked hope for countless others. The rest stop where it all began remained ordinary to most drivers. Just another brief pause along Interstate 85, but for Natalie Parker, it would always be the place where her life changed forever, not because she had failed or faltered, but because she had stood firm, documented the truth, and refused to be silenced. In the end, Natalie understood that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was facing it, and choosing justice, compassion, and integrity in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the lights of the highway stretched before her on the drive home, she felt a quiet sense of triumph, knowing that while the night had tested her, it had also illuminated the enduring power of truth. Final ending words. In the darkness of fear, she had found her voice, and that voice became a beacon of justice for all.